Welcome, family. This week we'll be talking about the Passion of the Christ, as this is called Passion Week. But today I have a very specific task, and that task is to make a very long story short. Long story short today. And so you're going to hear the beginning of the story. You're going to hear the end of the story. As the week progresses, I will fill in the blanks for you. But what you need to know is that the story starts like this, that God created the heavens and the earth, and he put details into everything, every tree, every piece of fruit, every plant, every flower, every animal. And he was designing all of this for a specific person we'll call Adam. And what God did is, after he created the heavens and the earth, he went to the lowest part of the earth. That's right. And he grabbed himself some dirt. And when he grabbed this dirt in his hands, he looked at it and he knew he had a task ahead. And so he picks up this dirt and he begins to form it in his hands. And as he's forming this dirt, he goes and he decides to breathe new life into it. And as he breathes life into this dust, we come up with a man named Adam, who was naked and unashamed, and God had everything for him that the garden had to offer. And in the midst of that, we know that he also made him a helpmate. He sent a helper to Adam named Eve, who also was naked and unashamed, and they had this whole garden to themselves. They had the whole wilderness, the whole earth. All they had to do was name the animals and tend to the garden, make sure everything was to God's liking. They were created in the image of God, and that they were creative and they had the capacity to love. Adam and Eve had it good. They had one rule to follow, and that was to not touch the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We know that somewhere they went off track. The Bible says it like this, that the serpent told the woman, "You won't die." God knows that the moment you eat from a tree, you'll see what's really going on. You'll be just like God, knowing everything, ranging from good and evil. You've read the Bible, you know the story. Eve took the fruit. She took a bite. She gave it to Adam, and all of a sudden they realized that they were naked. They became ashamed, and they felt the need to cover themselves because they had never before had this feeling like this. They were meant to be created in the image of God with the capacity to love and to create, but not with the ability to decide what was right and wrong. That was God's job, and that's what the devil was trying to get out of them, is saying, you will be like God, and that you get to make a decision on what's right and wrong for your life. God shows up, and he sees Adam and Eve covered and dressed with clothing that he did not give them. For the first time in their existence, they had comprehended what right and wrong was, because they had decided what right and wrong was. Satan had told them that when you eat of this fruit, you become like God. They already were like God, though, and that wasn't enough for them. They were like God, and they had the ability to create. They were like God in the ability, they had the capacity to love. But God did not want them to decide for themselves what right and wrong really was. Adam, in the day that you eat of this fruit, you'll surely die. And this one's going to sting, because we weren't designed for death. Later, the Apostle Paul will write that the sting of sin is death. The power of sin is the law. And Adam and Eve had no idea of what they were about to experience. And you fast forward today, the reason that we mourn, the reason it doesn't make sense, the reason we can't process death is because we were not designed to have to experience it. And in the midst of this, God shows up on the scene, and he asks what happens, and everybody points a finger at somebody else. And God, as he gets ready to banish them from the garden, as he gets ready to quarantine them from his mercy, as he gets ready to give them a stay-at-home order in their sin and their ideas of what they think God is, he gives a seed of hope. And that seed of hope is, he tells the devil that her son will stomp your head, and your head will bruise his heel. Imagine a foot stomp so hard that it bruises your own foot. God tells Adam, from the dirt you came, and from the dirt you will return. I made you from this. I didn't want you to have to go there. But since this is what you've done, this is all that you have to look forward to. We needed hope bad. This was unfamiliar territory. Doing what we were never designed to do, which is to experience death, to experience pain, to experience sorrow. I told you I was going to make a long story very short. I was going to give you the beginning and the end. And here's what happened. We're going to bring it together. The book of Romans chapter 5, it says, "For when we were still without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet perhaps for a good man someone would even dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died." The Message Bible actually says we couldn't do anything about it if we wanted to anyways. We were too weak and too rebellious. And that's the great thing about Christ. He showed up and he took care of a problem to solve what we not only could not solve, but probably would not solve anyways. In the meantime, from the time of the garden until the time Jesus shows up, we are living in separation. The Bible says in Romans chapter 6, verse 23, that the wages of sin is death. That death, however, was not just a physical death. That was the smallest part of it, actually. It was being separated, fenced out of the garden, separated from the very life giver himself, quarantined from the one who takes dirt, who takes filth, who takes contaminated situations and gives you beauty for ashes, joyous blessing for mourning, praise instead of despair. You see, when you work for sin, he only pays you in death. He only pays you in this idea of separation from God. But again, you weren't designed for this. You're supposed to be like this oak. You're supposed to be planted and rooted and not easily moved. But when you work for sin, his payment causes your roots to wither, causes you to be moved by every wind of doctrine, every wind of change, every wind of uncertainty. And that is not God's design for you. Death literally meant separation from God. And just like Adam and Eve were put out of the garden, we have been put out of God's presence when we have sin in our lives. The Apostle Paul would write these words to us to help us understand what was really going on. He says, "For sin is the sting of death. The power of sin is the law." Because our God is not just a God, but he is also Father, it was always his will that we would run to him and not from him. But that power of the law, that sting of death, lies to us and says our Father wants nothing to do with us. Sin in the law says stay home. Stay in the building that was built by guilt. Zero contact. Zero interaction. Separated and distanced so far that there would be zero chance of contacting a mercy that is more contagious than any virus, any sickness, any guilt, any shame that sin could bring your way. The Message Bible said it like this to us. Christ arrived right on time to make this happen. He didn't and doesn't wait for us to get ready. He presented himself for the sacrificial death when we were too weak and too rebellious to do anything to get ourselves ready. And even if we hadn't been so weak, we wouldn't have known what to do anyways. We can understand someone dying for a person we're dying for, and we can understand how someone good and noble could inspire us for selfless sacrifice. But God put his love on the line by offering his son in sacrificial death while we were of no use whatsoever to him. Long story short, we are living in separation, and Jesus takes us from death to life. I'll talk to you tomorrow.